All right, so everyone, this is Kendra Atleework, and she just wrote a book. It's called Miracle Country. I think we need to read this book in general, and I hope the viewers pick this up, and we will tease this also at the end of the interview where to get it. But it's important because it does talk a lot about nature, water. We talk a little bit about forest fires in this book, which is going on right now in California in general. And we see all over the country the climate catastrophes that are happening. So I think this book rather brings a lot of that to light. So Kendra, first of all, thanks so much for taking time to spend with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so can you tell the viewers that don't know much about you a little bit about yourself, Kendra?
So I grew up in Bishop, California, which is a really small town it's on the rain-shadowed side of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And that's what my book Miracle Country is about. Can people see us, or are they only hearing us?
Yes.
Okay, this is the book. So this is Miracle Country. So I wrote this book about the place where I'm from, and I grew up in this pretty wild, high desert. I lived in a house halfway up a mountainside overlooking the desert valley. So we're, just to give you a sense of where we're at, we're kind of between Yosemite and Death Valley. So we're on the other side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, which are the mountains that contain Yosemite. We're on the dry eastern rain-shadowed side. And then we're about an hour between Yosemite and about an hour from Death Valley. So we're similar in climate to Death Valley. We average 0 to 10 inches of rain per year. So sometimes no rain. I don't really remember the last time it rained. It was before February for sure. So anyways, I grew up in this place with kind of a harsh climate, a lot of blizzards in the winter, a lot of fires. And I had kind of eccentric parents who really loved the place and had been drawn here and met here. And then when I was 16, my mom died and I took off. I left home. I was gone for a decade. And during that time, I was really homesick and I started researching the place that I'd left behind. And eventually I was drawn back kind of by what I learned and also by coming to terms with my more difficult personal memories, but also just sort of seeing loss as it had impacted my own life, sort of pairing with loss on the level of the landscape and climate change and all of that. So I just wanted to come home and be with my community as we moved forward, facing kind of a difficult future. And the book, so Miracle Country, tells the story of that decision to come home. My family story paired with a lot of history of the West and California, water infrastructure, Los Angeles, where it gets its water, which is from my valley, and wildfire. The opening chapter takes place during a wildfire that burned a third of the houses in my childhood neighborhood in 2015, right in the heart of the California drought. And I was living in Minnesota at the time. This was part of the time when I had fled from home. And I flew home on a red-eye flight and sifted in the ash with the neighbors while the earth was still warm from the fire, just looking for anything that had survived. And that kicks off the book. And it was that fire that made me realize I wanted to come back and dig in with my community to see what the future had in store.
As we keep going into this interview, can you speak about your childhood and growing up with all these crazy things happening on, whether it was fire, drought? Obviously, you faced with your mother's passing, which is extremely tough in general. How did you overcome all this stuff?
Well, so I guess when I was growing up, my parents taught me to really love the place that I was from, despite it being a pretty harsh climate. And so it was really painful to sort of start watching it change. And this summer, so I'm looking out my window right now I'm here in my hometown of Bishop, California, and we have a gorgeous clear day. But the last month, really, we've been under thick, heavy smoke. Like we'll look at that. We all compulsively check our air quality apps all the time now, and to see if we can go out, and it'll be hazardous for days on end, and you're just trapped inside with your air filter. And it's really heartbreaking to know that that's because homes and trees and things are burning somewhere else. And so I think writing Miracle Country was kind of coming to terms with that kind of loss and change, both historically, because my valley's water goes to Los Angeles, and they control our economy in many ways and our industry, and we're more than 200 miles away from them, but they need our water. So that's a sense of loss as well, like a historic sense of loss. And I also researched the history of the valley and the indigenous people in the valley, the Paiute Numu people, and how the land had been taken from them and how they returned and created a vital community that's still here. So writing Miracle Country was kind of a way to come to terms with grief about climate change. And I guess I take solace in facing it with the community and knowing, for example, I was talking to a firefighter after my neighborhood burned in 2015, and he said, at least it happened. If it had to happen, I'm glad it happened here where I know my neighbors will save me. My neighbors will help me. And he and the other volunteer firefighters, like he was telling this story that's in Miracle Country. He's driving up the road in his truck, his fire truck. He sees his own house burning, and he just has to turn away and go on and save more houses. And he ended up saving my childhood house while his own house is burning. So he kept the community in his mind. And so I think that's at the heart of Miracle Country. Like if, rather than just being depressed about all the terrible stuff that's going on, we really can dig in with our community and take care of our homes.
How has Bishop been affected by these wildfires?
So we're not at an evacuation risk right now. The biggest fire that's near us is the Creek Fire, which is over the Sierra Nevada mountains. It's pretty close as the crow flies, but it would have to get over a massive granite mountain to affect us. So we're affected by the smoke for the most part. The Creek Fire itself, it's spawned 2 fire tornadoes. I mean, the whole state is the whole West is sitting under a blanket of smoke. There's 3.6 million acres that have burned in California already this year, which is unprecedented. And 5 of California's 20 biggest fires ever recorded have happened in 2020. So we are not getting the worst of it, and that we're not evacuating and our homes aren't being threatened, but we're very aware of what's going on because the smoke is like this gloomy, looming reminder for the whole West. And I hear that it's going to the East Coast and even appearing in the East Coast as the jet stream distributes it.
Can you educate the viewers before we move back into the book about how this happened? How did all these fires happen? I know this happens quite often in California in general. Is this mainly because of the drought, or was there some other issues that kind of, turned this up quite often in California?
Well, so California almost experiences ongoing rolling droughts in a lot of ways. The thing with climate change in the West is it causes more extreme swings from wet to dry in the West. So we'll have longer, harsher droughts, and we'll also have longer, harsher, we'll have floods, we'll have more rain. And so when we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of vegetation. And then if that's followed up by years of extreme heat and dryness with a drought, that's just fuel. There's all this fuel, and it's just ripe for huge fires. And then so our fire season has been expanding regularly each year, and every year it's like we set new records. And the other dangerous thing about wildfire in California is typically we get our precipitation in the winter, right? And as climate change messes with those patterns, we start not getting precipitation in the winter, or we get it later in the winter, or if it's a drought, we don't get it at all. And we still get our winter winds. So we get these strong winds in the winter. So you've got a lot of foliage from a previous wet winter. You've got a super dry summer, record-breaking heat, parching it all out. And then you have wind without precipitation in the fall. And that's just recipes for massive, massive fires.
Are you worried about, LA's dependence on the water in Bishop, that it really could basically dry Bishop out for good?
That's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing struggle between Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the utility company, and the people that live where I live in the Eastern Sierra. And it's tricky because DWP, Department of Water and Power, they're a huge utility company. They have a bottom line, which is keeping costs low for ratepayers, kind of at any environmental and community cost to the Eastern Sierra. They're just, they're just pursuing their bottom line. I think a lot of Los Angeles residents, a lot of them don't even know where their water comes from. And I think if they did, they would not want the Eastern Sierra to be harmed, as it often is, by DWP's bottom line. they would be more interested in having changes to lifestyle that enabled the water to go farther. So I think it is really concerning what will happen as we start to see more severe drought. Because the city's way more powerful than we are as far as their legal clout, and they have a lot more money to spend on lawsuits, and it'll hurt our most vulnerable, and it'll hurt our ecosystems. But we're watching, we're paying attention, and we really want to work with people who live in LA to sort of make that water go around.
Are there any politicians fighting for this? And is there any water infrastructure being built?
I only know about it really, and with anecdotal grassroots examples. I know that there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of agriculture initiatives where smaller farms are trying to think about, how can we do this differently? How can we do crop rotation, and so that we don't just like deplete this soil? How can we water things more efficiently? I know that's happening, but it's going to be really, really hard to push that into big ag, because everything is just so driven by a bottom line of producing as much crop for as little money, regardless of the long-term consequences. So it's kind of like, and I talk about this a lot in Miracle Country, we have to start thinking in a much longer timeline. We have to start thinking, we might not make the maximum profit from this crop or this industry or this endeavor this year. But what is going to be the long-term impact of continuing to do it as we have been doing it?
Right.
So.
Kendra Atleework here on Fire Breathing Rob. The book is Miracle Country. As we move on into the interview and get toward the end of the interview, so are you really worried about water wars happening in California and even around the country?
Yeah, I mean, water wars are ongoing in the sense that it's an ongoing legal conflict, right, between the source, like places like my place, and then where the need is. And when we move water, when we go to such extreme lengths to move water around the state, there's so many conflicting interests. Like there was a lot of controversy about, so the Central Valley, where agriculture in California, most of it happens, is their water comes from the California aqueduct, which gets Sierra Nevada snowmelt that comes like around the San Francisco area. It's flowing out of, it's starting that far north, and it's getting carried by these big aqueducts from Northern California down through Central California. And when you drive through there, you see signs, no water, no jobs, you need, no water, no food. And that's because there's a conflict between the environmental initiative to protect, just as one example, the Delta smelt, which is an endangered native fish species, and it's endangered, and it lives in the delta of these rivers where this water that is carried for the agriculture comes from. So the water was being limited in how much it was being moved around and how much of it was taken to Central California, because there were legal battles to protect this fish. But then you have these farmers who, they're using, many of them, more archaic, non-efficient ways of watering crops, right? But they're still dependent on that water to get these crops out. So it's a really complicated issue that isn't going to get solved anytime fast. So I'd say water wars are happening right now in courtrooms all over the place. And then the results of that, like maybe here in the Eastern Sierra, we have a meadow dry up because Los Angeles has diverted the streams so much that the groundwater has lowered, and that meadow has died because the roots can't reach the water anymore. And then you see the ripple effect ecologically of stuff like that. So I'd say they're happening now.
What is your opinion on these politicians that, we're hearing in Florida, where I am, and all the people listening around the country are hearing that California is so progressive on the environment and they're doing great things. What's your opinion on that? Is that just kind of BS in plain English?
Well, I mean, I'm inclined to say it's probably a lot more moderate than it needs to be to really prevent catastrophe. But at the same time, I do have hope that California is an interesting place because it was almost founded as a state on this combination of tragedy and innovation, right? You have the gold rush, which was an ecological and human rights disaster in so many ways, but it also launched California as like an economic and industrial superpower and also a place of innovation with technology and also with ways of living, which I write a lot about in Miracle Country. So I do have hope that as a state we can be a leader in some of this stuff. And yeah, it's going to probably be a lot of back and forth, and there will be a lot of collateral damage as stuff changes slowly.
Kendra Atleework here on Fire Breathing Rob. The book again is Miracle Country. We know the elections are coming up. Do you see any hope with any of the candidates running for president that they will help the environment, or do you feel like it's going to be the same old, regardless of who wins?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, I'm going to be voting for Biden personally, but I do feel that he's going to be too moderate on climate.
What do you expect, living in Bishop, and it seems like Los Angeles in plain English is stealing your water. And what happens when that water runs dry, for a person like you that loves Bishop and, enjoys being there and you grew up there, are you going to have to move out because there's no water left?
Well, we've seen that we've seen some of what happens when the water runs really low here during the drought, because so we're unique in California in that our groundwater is metered because of our relationship to Los Angeles. Actually, they control how much there's a small amount of agriculture here still in Los Angeles. They actually lease land from Los Angeles, these local farmers and ranchers, because Los Angeles owns much of the land in my valley. And so Los Angeles meters how much groundwater they use and how much surface water they use to run their farms. And because of that, which is unique in California, it's starting to be more common, but in California, traditionally, you could pump as much water out of the ground as you wanted and no one was going to pay attention. So we're kind of protected in that way, where they are limited in how much they can lower the groundwater, but they can divert the snowmelt that's coming out of the mountains into the aqueduct before it's allowed to percolate down into the aquifer beneath us. So that's been a problem. People have lost their wells. There's been, in my book, I have stories about neighbors damming. Generally, we get along pretty well here, but sometimes you have situations of, say, somebody damming the creek in their own yard to water their garden and fill up their pond, and then everybody downstream dries up. So there's a lot of figuring out how to share that has to go on. But yeah, people's creeks were dry, fish were dead and rotting on the bottom of everybody's ponds. My dad's well went dry, which it's a major thing to drill a new well, and it's really expensive. So this really hurts the most vulnerable people when these kind of water conflicts happen. So yeah, I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous about living under a blanket of smoke all summer and all fall. That also makes me afraid about the plausibility of being able to continue to remain in the place that I love.
It seems like you've really lived a peaceful, simple life. And, we see whether it's in Florida, California, in the city in general, people are always on their phones. They're not enjoying nature for the most part. What advice would you give to these people that are always, looking down at their phones and not enjoying, what God's gift to the world was as far as nature goes?
Well, I certainly should practice what I preach here, because I'm certainly, well, I held off on getting a smartphone as long as I possibly could, but then I had to. So I have one now, and I definitely fall into its clutches. But watch that new social media documentary. Figure out how to not let that addiction that corporations have cultivated in you for their own profit control your life.
Right, no, I agree.
I'm trying to do that as much as I can. Because you're the product, right? You're the product for these social media companies. And I also I think social media and smartphones have great potentially to connect people, but I think as they exist now in these algorithms that are described in that documentary, they really crush discourse. It's really hard to have a nuanced argument on social media. Also, the algorithms just serve you up more of your own bubble. I really like following and engaging with people from a bunch of different political persuasions on there. because I'm really not interested in hearing the shouting or shouting myself of a one party line. Like, I really think discourse is super important, civil discourse, and hearing from people that think differently than you and talking with them. So like transcending, like our media tools are so bad for that. So transcending that, and also, yeah, just put the phone away and go for a walk. When you have, everyone in California is really good about this right now, because it's like, oh, the air's clear, I'm going outside all day.
No, well, because I watched, I think either you made the video or maybe someone else did of you, when you said, oh, it's only 10 minutes to walk to the grocery store. I can walk here, I can walk there, all these places. Is that just because it's a small town, or even if you lived in like a bigger city, would you mostly bike or walk to places just because of the convenience and not being stuck in traffic in general?
Yeah, I'm lucky. I've always lived in places that are, well, that's not necessarily true. Southern California, it's hard to walk places. But when I lived in Minneapolis, I walked and biked. And yeah, I like walking around my little town. And yeah, you just, things slow down a bit and there's no traffic. Yeah.
What lessons do you want the readers to learn from, reading this book of Miracle Country?
I guess I'd like readers of Miracle Country to come away just maybe thinking about their relationship to home a bit differently, because I spent 6 years writing this book and it covers about a decade of my life, and it's basically me wrestling with the idea of home throughout the entire book, in terms of my own family, in terms of my own difficult personal memories, and also in terms of history and contemporary situation. So I guess readers anywhere, I would hope, come away thinking about what they want to protect, what they want to steward as we move forward into an increasingly unstable and scary future.
Kendra Atleework here on Fire Breathing Rob. She wrote the book Miracle Country. Definitely go out and buy it. And as we end the interview, Kendra, where can the people buy this book?
You can get Miracle Country anywhere books are sold. You can follow me and see other online events and get a newsletter and whatnot, which is mostly pictures of my valley, on a website, which is just atleework.com. And I recommend, if you're going to buy the book, buying it from your local indie bookstore, because they really need the support right now.
All right. Again, Kendra Atleework here on Fire Breathing Rob. Again, the book Miracle Country. Check it out. Kendra, let's do this again down the road.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Awesome.